members start to notice that, because it's usually the time that you are all together. This year, obviously, that's going to look a lot different for a lot of people, I think, especially if you're not doing the same sort of gathering for Thanksgiving, or you're doing a virtual gathering for Thanksgiving. So there's going to be some more difficulties that you're going to need to take into account with this. But it is definitely something that you can still keep an eye out on, and make sure that you're, especially maybe your parents or other loved ones, are they have what they need for you or somebody else to step in for them and help make those decisions when the time comes. With everything with COVID and kind of people being sort of kept in their homes where it's harder for them to go out, especially if they're older and at risk, it's something that some legal documents are going to be very important for you to be able to step in for them, whether or not they've lost capacity, but just to step in and help them in the meantime when they can't safely leave their home. So there's a couple of resources we have for you all that cover some of the things you want to keep an eye out for. And I'm going to walk through some of the, what the Alzheimer's Association says are some early signs of, potential dementia or Alzheimer's. So welcome, everybody. I'm attorney Justin Randall with Hooper Law Office. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking about signs that your loved one may need care, and things to keep an eye out on, behavioral changes, memory changes, things like that, people tend to notice a lot, especially this time of year as they all get together for the holidays. That is going to be different this year, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but there are still things you can keep an eye out on if you're doing like a virtual get together for the family, or what, only close family members, whatever it might be. So if you have registered via Zoom for this, and after this is all over, we will be sending you an email with the feedback form for this. A couple of things with that: if you would like us to reach out to you, if anything I raised today creates any concerns, or it just addresses concerns that you've already had, and you'd like to come in and talk to one of the attorneys here, on that feedback form, along with just general feedback about how you felt about this presentation, there's an ability for you to put in your contact information and have us, give us the okay to reach out to you to set up initial consultation. Those are free consultations. We don't charge for those initial consultations. And we usually schedule them for about 2 hours. So we won't reach out to you unless you fill that out. But just if it is something you'd like to do, please fill that out and let us know. We also have a couple materials for you. So let me grab those real quick. One of the things we have here is the activities of daily living chart. So an activity of daily living is essentially what, various kind of major activities that, you and I do without thinking about it. So to give you an idea, bathing, getting around. So what they call ambulation, but, that would be like the ability to walk on your own. There's, 5 or 6 kind of main ones that you generally see listed. We have 5 on that chart. Those are the types of things that long-term care looks at for, what level of care you might need, and whether or not certain, long-term care policies kick in, whether Medicaid kicks in, things like that. So that'll give you an idea of if you're starting to notice your loved one have some difficulties with those, it might be time to start talking about what kind of legal documents your loved ones have. Have they thought about care? Do they have long-term care insurance? Any of those types of conversations. And I should mention as well, if you are participating via Zoom, we do have a Q&A function. So if anything I talk about, you have any questions on anything while I'm presenting, you can send in a question and I can see it, and I'll try to address it in as quickly as I can. It's really helpful when people have questions, because that kind of steers me to what you guys are concerned about. So to get started, I'm going to have the link to this dropped in the chat box for you guys, so you guys can all see this. But the Alzheimer's Association has a really good list of kind of 10 early signs, warning signs of, somebody has dementia or Alzheimer's, or maybe may have that diagnosis in the future. A lot of things are kind of things that can overlap with standard aging. As we age, we all have our memory, it all declines a little bit. There's always that normal aging. But what they really talk about in that list is, yes, there are normal signs of aging incorporated into that, but it can also go beyond that. It can also be a sign that somebody may have the early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. The biggest ones kind of are, and this is what any sort of expert on dementia or Alzheimer's would tell you, is it's not just that they've always been that way, right? Like if I was just a normally forgetful person and I was still forgetting things, that doesn't mean I have dementia or Alzheimer's. It just means that's kind of who I am. If I begin to develop that suddenly or unexpectedly, or it's clearly becoming worse, then that can be an early sign of that. So that's one thing. The ability to follow recipes is a big one that people mention a lot. If your mom has this family recipe that she's made for many years, and then all of a sudden she has trouble following it. She's always been able to do it previously. Well, then that might be a sign that you need to look into some legal planning for her, some preparing for care if need be, those types of things. So it's a really great resource. I won't run you through all 10 right now. We have it available for you. So please, if you have trouble with it, or you would like us to send email to you, we'll make it available. But really, the activities of daily living are things that are more applicable once you are needing care. So a couple of things that often come up when someone is noticing signs that their loved one needs care is that kind of initial panic of, what do I do? It's kind of an unknown area for a lot of us. Obviously, we here are more versed in it just because it's something we see more often, and we have received training through like the Purple Angel training for dementia awareness. But I wouldn't expect somebody just to understand the early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, or to be able to spot it right away, or to know what to do. So really, the first thing to look at is talk to your parents or your loved ones, and try to get a grasp on their situation a little bit. Who manages your finances for you? Do you have a financial advisor? Do you have long-term care insurance? That's going to be a really important thing to be aware of, especially if that care need increases to the point where they need to no longer be in their own home and receive care at a facility. Do you have legal planning in place? So with the legal planning, that's where you're going to be able to get the most authority to step in and help them. Their financial advisor, knowing who that is very helpful, because you know who to go talk to, you know how to get the picture. But there are certain things you just can't do for a loved one unless that authority has been granted to you. So specifically, what I'm really talking about here is properly executed powers of attorney for both finance and health. Those are critical for you to be able to step in and provide assistance to a loved one who is experiencing or going through and kind of being a dementia survivor, having that care need come up. So with the financial power of attorney and the healthcare power of attorney, it's really important that these are what we call immediately effective powers of attorney. So what that essentially means is you don't want some sort of triggering event to allow you to step in and have that authority. So what you'll often see, and this is very common, for example, at like care facilities, hospitals, things like that, for their healthcare powers of attorneys, they require a declaration of incapacity. With a financial power of attorney in particular, it's really, you don't want to require that declaration of incapacity unless you have a good reason to, because there's going to be a lot of situations where somebody might not be to the point where they have an actual incapacity, where they're unable to fully make those decisions for themselves anymore. But there's still times where they may need assistance. They may need sort of that guiding hand, or the support to lean on, so that you can help them out, even though for the most part they're still okay on their own. So with finances, that's really important too, because that's when you can step in and help organize their checkbook, pay their bills, all of that kind of stuff. And with powers of attorney for finance in particular, there's going to be a really important sort of set of authorities that you would want included in there for your loved one. The big thing there is going to be, can you engage in long-term care planning for them? Because if you don't have those authorities and then they lose the capacity required to sign legal documents, it may be too late for you to actually do any protection planning for them. You may be very, very limited in what you're allowed to do, because not only does the power of attorney not include the proper authorities, but they didn't sign that planning themselves before they lost the ability to do so. So it's not just some kind of umbrella term where it says, oh, my power of attorney agent can engage in long-term care planning. It's really kind of a group of authorities. Can they gift assets on your behalf? Can they set up an irrevocable trust? Can they do planning around government benefits, things like that? So just to give you an idea, that's not an exhaustive list. That's just a couple options that you would definitely want included. But yeah, it's to give you an idea of kind of what you want in there. So the immediately effective aspect of it just makes it more useful, especially right now. If you really think about it, a lot of these, the older population, they're at risk for COVID, and more at risk than someone in my age bracket, for example. So if they don't feel safe leaving home, but they need someone to go out and do something for them, like go to the bank for them, or talk with an attorney on their behalf, or anything like that, you need an immediately effective power of attorney. Because if they are still mentally competent and don't have an incapacity at that time, that one requiring that event to occur first, that triggering event to occur, well, then that agent is not going to have any authority until it does. So with an immediately effective financial power of attorney, you're saying, hey, even if I have capacity, I trust this person enough to step in and help me if I really need it. And if I just can't do something myself, regardless of whether or not I am personally incapacitated yet. So that's a big thing. The other thing too is some assisted living facilities, not all, but some, don't have the right certification to accept people to live there if they have what's called a springing power of attorney, if they've been declared incapacitated. So it's just something to keep in mind, where occasionally, if that's what the document requires, you end up being kind of pushed to get that declaration of incapacity sooner, so you can step in and help, when it's not required if it's drafted differently. So it's just something to keep in mind. So with the healthcare, the immediately effective nature of it just is really more so for that, keeping their options open for facilities where they can receive care down the line. But it also is very helpful if it's ever a temporary incapacity, where it's not, it's not maybe dementia or Alzheimer's that's gotten to the point where, they're not going to recover or, regain capacity from it. Whereas, somebody going under anesthesia for a surgery, could be a temporary incapacity, right? So there's a lot of reasons for it, but long-term care is a big aspect of why it's important to have these immediately effective. And on the financial side, with COVID and everything, if they're homebound just because of their concern of going out, or their risk group, or anything like that, it's really helpful to have somebody just be able to go out and do those things for you if they're, offering to do so, and they're the one you trust to do so. So that's very important. What happens if you don't have these documents in place, right? What happens if somebody doesn't have the capacity to sign documents anymore, legal documents? What can you do to plan for your loved one? And unfortunately, the answer to that is your options are extremely limited. So, when somebody comes in to talk to me, for example, and they say, mom or dad has Alzheimer's or dementia, we need to do some planning to make sure that we're prepared for long-term care, or we can protect some assets from being spent down to nothing. What do we do? The first thing we have to look at is, one, does that person with that diagnosis, do they actually have the capacity to sign those documents? So just because, and this is a common misconception, but just because somebody has a diagnosis for dementia or Alzheimer's does not mean that they lack the capacity required to sign legal documents. It just means that it's something to keep in mind when you're talking to that individual and making sure that they understand what they're signing. So we can still have them sign things if we can tell that they have the capacity to sign those documents, but it's something then we need to verify first before we can have them sign anything. So what happens if they don't have that capacity, though? We say, well, do they have any current powers of attorney? I would then look at somebody's financial power of attorney, look through the authorities granted in it, and see if, I have what I need in there for that agent to be able to do effective legal planning on behalf of their parent more often than not. So if they don't have those powers in there, though, then we're extremely limited in what we can do. So, a power of attorney for finance, for example, is not just this, just because you have one does not mean you're covered in all aspects. It's really important to look at what's in the document itself. If it doesn't have certain authorities, then you're not granting that authority to your agent. So that means they may not be able to do that on your behalf and very likely won't. So if you, for example, said, they could, write checks, but you didn't say that they could open and close accounts, you might have issues with one of those, with opening and closing accounts going forward. So that's just an example, but it can include a lot of, a whole host of authorities. Be careful when you have sort of the, like the state statutory power of attorney, for example, because that is a very, very vague document. Rather than saying, can somebody write checks or open and close bank accounts or pay my bills? It asks whether you want to grant banking powers, which is, and that, there's no description of what that means. It just says banking powers. And your guess is as good as mine as to what that could all potentially include. And sometimes it's up to the individual, looking at that document to say, well, okay, in my opinion, this is what that means. And you don't want to rely on someone's opinion of what that document means. You want it to be very clear. So you would want it to be very specific about all the financial powers that you're talking about here. So if you are even beginning to notice some cognitive decline in your loved one, or you're concerned about it, or you haven't noticed any cognitive decline, but you're still concerned about the potential of it, it's incredibly important to get these documents in place if your parents or your loved ones don't have them, and to make sure that they're well drafted too, not just some form off of the internet, because then you're really kind of in the Wild West, if you will, of what you may be getting out of that. Sometimes people download the wrong states form, or they get bad advice from some internet forum. I mean, it's just, you have to be very careful. So if your parents don't have these documents, or it's been a while since they've updated them, talking more than 3 to 5 years or so, talk about going and having them updated again, or having them go back to their estate planning attorney. Or if they've never done these documents, make sure that they go to an estate planning attorney to get them in place. If you're the child that tends to help them the most, what I find very helpful is I often invite my clients in that situation to have their child come along with them, because it's really important that you're up to speed too of what you may need to do, and what you can do or what you can't do, and what what the process of long-term care might look like for somebody, financially, legally, life change wise, all of that. So be involved with that planning process if your parents are okay with it. Obviously, it's up to them, but I would say ask them if you can be included in those conversations, and make sure they're okay with it. But it's really important to be involved. So if you don't have these documents, like I said, and you still need the ability to step in and help them, if you don't have a properly drafted or executed power of attorney for both finance or health, and somebody does lose capacity, that's when you're in a process known as guardianship. So guardianship is where you petition a court for essentially the ability to manage finances, manage health decisions, all of that kind of stuff for somebody. The problem with guardianship is, one, you can very likely avoid ever needing it if you have a well-drafted power of attorney already. It will cover most of your bases, if not all of them. And two, guardianship is not going to, the guardianship court is not going to authorize all of the authorities you would need to manage, long-term care planning. There's just certain things they would not allow you to do, because it's, we're talking about, a state's interest in Medicaid, for example. So they're not going to authorize those authorities. And I do have a question here. So somebody asked if I think my mom is struggling with her memory, but my siblings don't see it. How do I get us all on the same page? So this comes up a lot. Sometimes people don't want to see it because it's hard, right? I mean, it's a very hard thing to acknowledge, especially in that parent who's kind of always been there and been strong, or been sort of that central figure, right? I'm a huge proponent of that family meeting. I think if you can convince people to sit down and maybe even sit down with an attorney, an elder law or estate planning attorney in particular, to talk through kind of what happens if we don't prepare for this. There's no harm in preparing for someone losing memory care issues. So even if someone is having a hard time sort of coming to terms with a parent having those issues, getting those documents in place, getting that planning in place while you still have time, everyone should be on board with that, right? So, but sometimes it takes that family meeting to sit down and say, look, I understand that you're, having a hard time coming to terms with this, or you don't see it, but I have a lot of concerns. Can we please just have mom or dad, in this case, have your mom talk to an attorney and see what we can do, right? So I hope that answers it. There's no legal way to get everyone on the same page, unfortunately. It's obviously that can be a very touchy subject for people, but it's important to have that conversation. It's kind of like if somebody wants to be removed from life support in certain circumstances, right? And not comparing those two decisions, but it's a decision that people have a hard time with. So it's important to have everyone on the same page. And then another question here is there any kind of list one can use to review the documents you have to make sure that all the necessary bases are covered, or if revisions should be done? So that is going to depend a lot, I suppose, on the attorney who drafted the plan. If it's one through our office, we have a couple of tools we use for that. For example, we keep everything in the big red book, a big estate planning binder with all of the documents in one place. We also have a tool that we've given out on occasion called a document finder that we created, sort of a chart with, all right, here's my power of attorney for finance, and then a box underneath of where is it located, so that somebody can, put it on their fridge or by the coffee table or something, somewhere accessible, so somebody can find it. And if you're talking more about, how do we make sure that the documents themselves are adequate? That might be something that you want to have an attorney review, because, it might sound like it covers everything, but unless you do this all the time, it can be hard to understand exactly the authorities you're looking for. So if somebody brought in a power of attorney to me and said, does this have what we need? I could look at it and say, well, it has some of the things you need, or it has none of the things that you need, or you're good. So like I mentioned previously, we do free 2-hour consultations for people. So if it does, there's no harm in having those documents reviewed by one of us, for example. And then, they'll also be able to tell you too, if your bases are covered, right? If somebody came in and they had, an irrevocable trust and had things set aside in it, and it was properly drafted, they had the right powers of attorney, maybe they had long-term care insurance, I could look down and I could say, wow, this was really well done. It's, you should be okay. Or I could look at it and say, well, there's certain things I'd like to see added in here while we still have time to do so. That, like I said, that can really vary depending on, which attorney drafted it at which firm, or, how long ago was it drafted? The top of the line power of attorney 20 years ago might look terrible by today's standards, just because the laws have changed so much. It doesn't mean it was bad planning. It just means it's out of date, right? Laws change. Our ability to do things through documents change over time. We've added powers to our powers of attorney as we've updated them just from our own internal efforts as well. So it can be kind of across the board why these things need to be reviewed frequently enough, or every so often. But yeah, I hope that's a bit of a rambling answer, I know, but I hope that kind of gives you an idea of, if you can't find these documents, if your parent knows where they are, try to get them to let you know where they are. At least you don't have to ask to see who's getting what in the estate plan or anything like that. But if you can say, well, can you please, at least mom or dad, can you show me where they are just so I know where to look? One thing I'll add to that too is, if they tell you it's in a safe deposit box, tell them not to keep it in a safe deposit box at the bank. Because, for example, a financial power of attorney will often say, my agent can go into a safe deposit box for me. Well, if you've thrown that in the safe deposit box, where are they going to have that document? How are they going to have that authority? You're going to have to tell them to unlock the safe deposit box to find it, and they might not listen to you. So it's just, that's more of a practical matter, hopefully. But, ask them to see things. If they don't know where they are, if they can't find them, you might have to get new ones in place. Or if it was drafted by a firm, you can, like for example, we have digital copies of everything that we've drafted for clients. So if somebody lost their documents, I have signed copies that I can, have still be legally valid for somebody. So that it might be a first place to look if you can't find them. But if you can't get a hold of that attorney, or they no longer practice and don't have that person taking over their files, or whatever it might be, these things can happen. Look at getting new ones in place. If there is any issue with finding the documents, the sooner the better at getting new ones in place, because if there's any sort of concern about memory care issues, time can really be of the essence to get moving on that. You really want to make sure that they have the capacity to sign new ones, because without properly executed, financial powers of attorney, for example, you might not be able to do any additional planning for them, any additional sort of asset protection from long-term care expenses. So I hope that answers it. It was a bit of my answer was a bit rambling, and there's a lot of different things that you can do to try to keep those, in a findable spot, somewhere where you can easily, accessible spot, I should say. So something to definitely keep in mind there. But yeah, really with these documents, you don't want to wait too long, because like I mentioned, if they lose capacity, if your parent loses capacity and an attorney doesn't, think that they can sign new documents, you don't want to have to rely on the guardianship process to get you what you need, because they'll certainly, they give you authorities to step in and help, but it won't likely, or almost certainly won't give you the authorities you need to do any sort of long-term care planning in terms of, gifting assets to an asset protected trust, or to, anything like that. It's not going to help you there. So you don't want to rely on it. And it's really, it's really avoidable if you have powers of attorney in place. And like I was saying earlier, with a lot of the immediately effective ones, if that person is not causing harm to themselves, or financially speaking in particular, or to loved ones or anything like that, they may never need an actual declaration of incapacity by a physician. As long as they're not doing those sort of financially harmful things to themselves, as long as you have the power of attorney authority you need, you can do those things for them and sort of make it so that they're not causing any harm to themselves, but you might not need that declaration of incapacity. There are exceptions to that, certainly. For example, I've had situations come up before where it was very difficult to keep like a credit card out of someone's hand, or they kept buying more things off of Amazon, or it's something like that, and they were forgetting that they were buying them. So those are the types of things where you hope you can avoid them through practical measures, but there are times where a declaration of incapacity then is going, or a guardianship court is going to be the one that says, I'm sorry, this person can't buy things anymore, in order to, cause a prevention of harm from the spouse potentially, or family members or dependents or anything like that. So there's a lot of different sort of practical things that you can do with a lot of these, precautionary measures and things like that too. The legal side of it is really making sure that you have the authority to do what you need. So if you cannot find those documents, I urge you to at least have that discussion to try to find them. And if you can't, get new ones in place. That's the only, kind of fail-safe option there, is to get new ones in place if you just cannot find them. And plus, depending on how long ago they might have been drafted, they might need to be updated anyway. So it's just something to consider. With once you've kind of gotten that sort of situation under control a little bit, you've gotten documents in place, you've talked with an attorney, maybe you have the diagnosis for your loved one of Alzheimer's or dementia, so you kind of have an idea of what to expect. It can be really helpful too to look at potential future care options as well. There's a lot of different really good organizations that can help your loved one find the right place to live too. What's best for their care, what's best for what they want out of where they live. Not all facilities are the same across the board. Some are better than others. Some have more amenities than others, and the price can vary widely. Kind of a range of care can be anywhere, if you're looking at maybe the lower end of assisted living needs, anywhere from $5,000 a month to $6,000 maybe, up to, if you're looking at full skilled nursing where someone needs a lot of assistance, potentially $11,000, $12,000 a month. So knowing where you're looking is really important too. And that's not something you necessarily have experience doing, or a lot of people do. So there are really good services that can help you out. One that we work with quite a lot is Care Patrol, for example. They're what we call a geriatric care manager. They help you find the right facility. This can be in advance. It's usually more so when somebody is looking at going in care more quickly that they step in, but they would maybe have some good recommendations about locations of facilities that are right for you, or the types of care they might need. I mean, there's a lot of really good organizations out there, and that's just one of them, but there are many. So that can be a good step, getting kind of that all in place. Once that's in place, keep a close eye on them. Make sure that you're checking in on them. As I sort of brought up earlier, this is going to be very difficult this year, I think, for a lot of people to spot these sorts of declines if they're not interacting with them on a daily basis, because it's, for a lot of us, we don't have that ability to be around our loved ones right now because of their risk group, or where, the family's being particularly cautious with everything. And so it's hard to spot it over Zoom or FaceTime or over, the phone. I mean, it can be hard. So, I don't have a perfect solution for you there, a perfect answer for the type of ways you can go about kind of getting around that issue. But keep in mind that, there are, like Nicole in the chat there put the link to the Alzheimer's Association sort of 10 early signs. That's a great tool. Don't have to memorize it, but it's good to read through and kind of spot those signs. So we're getting close to, or at 6:31 here, sorry. So I went a little over, but again, I just want to remind all of you that if you would, and anything I brought up kind of raises area of concerns for you, you can come in and talk to any one of us here. If you registered, you'll be receiving, that email with the feedback form where you can say you'd like us to reach out and set up a time to chat. We're doing web conferences and phone conferences as well right now. So you don't have to worry about, coming in and interacting directly if that's a concern of yours either. So yeah, please do that. Please fill it out anyway if you get it, just because, you don't have to put your contact information in there, but just let us know how you're liking these webinars, if you've attended more than one, or any topics you'd like us to talk about. And then otherwise, thank you all for joining me tonight, and I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. I hope you get to at least virtually spend time with your family and enjoy that. It's been a tough year for a lot of people, so enjoy your family time when you can, and let us know if there's any questions